When the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, many of its most powerful men died, fled, or stood trial. But what about the women who had lived beside them, the wives of Nazi leaders? Some adored, some feared, many forgotten, were suddenly forced to face a world where their husband's power meant nothing, and their names were now toxic. Some tried to disappear, some clung to the ideology until their final breath, and others fought desperately to rebuild lives shattered by a war they didn't start, but certainly benefited from. This is the untold story of what happened to the wives of Nazi leaders after World War II. Part 1. The death of the First Lady, Magda Goebbels. Magda Goebbels was often described as the First Lady of the Third Reich. Elegant, cultured, and fiercely loyal to Hitler, she played the role of the perfect Nazi matriarch. But as the war drew to a close, her devotion became chillingly absolute. In the claustrophobic darkness of the Führer bunker, Magda refused every chance to escape Berlin. She believed life after Hitler was meaningless. And on April 30th, 1945, the same day, Hitler took his own life. Magda made a horrifying choice. She drugged her 6 children with morphine, then poisoned them with cyanide while they slept. Hours later, she and her husband Joseph Goebbels walked outside the bunker and killed themselves. Magda never lived to face the post-war world, but her legacy would haunt Germany for decades. Part 2. Emmy Goering, from national celebrity to post-war pariah. Emmy Sonnemann, the glamorous actress turned wife of Hermann Goering, once enjoyed a life of extreme luxury. She hosted lavish parties, mingled with high society, and lived in an estate so extravagant that Allied officers were stunned by its scale. But when the war ended, Emmy's world evaporated. She was arrested by Allied forces and banned from performing on stage. Her wealth was confiscated, her property seized, and she was classified as a major Nazi supporter, though she insisted she was merely a wife. After her release, she lived on a small pension and raised her daughter Etta in relative obscurity. The woman who once dined with Europe's elites died quietly in 1973, having never fully escaped the shadow of her husband. Part 3. Margaret Himmler, the ideological true believer. Margaret Marga Himmler was not simply the wife of Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust. She was a hardline Nazi in her own right, strict, disciplined, and deeply committed to racial ideology. Marga ran military hospitals and openly expressed anti-Semitic beliefs long before her husband gained power. When the war ended, Allied interrogators expected her to deny everything, but she didn't. She defended the regime, she defended her husband, she defended the ideology. Marga was placed under denazification trial and classified as a major offender. She lost her home, most of her wealth, and spent the rest of her life moving between small apartments, supported occasionally by loyal, far-right circles. She died in 1967 unrepentant. Part 4. Gerda Bormann, escaping into the shadows. Gerda Bormann, wife of Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary and one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany, lived a life of privilege and access. But when Berlin fell, she vanished into chaos. Gerda fled with her children, moving through collapsing German towns as Allied troops advanced. Ill and exhausted, she eventually crossed into Italy using forged papers. She died in 1946, not knowing that her husband had also died near Berlin while trying to escape Soviet forces. For many years, rumors suggested she had survived and was living under a new identity, but none were ever proven. Her children were scattered across monasteries and foster homes, their family name becoming a lifelong burden. Part 5. Lena Heydrich, the unrepentant widow. Few Nazi wives have generated as much controversy as Lena Heydrich, widow of Reinhard Heydrich, the butcher of Prague, and one of the main architects of the Holocaust. Unlike many others, Lena did not distance herself from her husband's actions. She defended him, admired him, praised him publicly even decades after the war. After Heydrich's assassination in 1942, Lena received a generous pension from Hitler himself. Post-war, she fought legal battles to keep receiving widow's compensation from the German government, and shockingly, she partially succeeded. She moved to the island of Fehmarn, opened a small hotel, and raised her children there. Travelers who stayed with her rarely knew the identity of the friendly woman running the place. She died in 1985, still describing her husband as a good man. Part 6. Gisela Wagner, Annegret Speer, and others, Lives in the Long Shadow. Not all Nazi leaders had wives who were deeply involved in politics. Some were young women who married into power and were left to deal with the consequences. Albert Speer's wife, Margaret, after her husband, Hitler's chief architect, was imprisoned at Spandau. Margaret Speer lived quietly, rarely speaking to the media. She avoided political statements and focused on raising their children. She remained married to Albert until his death. Karl Dunnit's wife, Ingeborg, after the war, she supported her husband during his imprisonment for war crimes. The couple reunited after his release, living a modest life until their deaths in the 1970s. Rudolf Hess's wife, Ilse, she spent decades campaigning for her husband's release from Spandau prison. Ilse remained fiercely loyal and visited him until her own death in 1995. Most Nazi wives were not prosecuted. Legally, being married to a war criminal was not a crime, but socially, it might as well have been. Many women changed their names, moved to small towns, raised children alone, lived under suspicion for decades. Some truly did not know the depth of their husband's crimes. Others knew exactly what was happening and simply refused to admit it. Their stories reveal a post-war Germany struggling to confront its past, while ordinary families lived with the consequences of decisions made behind closed doors. The fall of the Third Reich did not end when its generals were executed or imprisoned. It continued for years through the lives of the women who had stood beside them willingly or not. Some wives paid with poverty, some paid with exile, some paid with lifelong shame, and others refused to pay anything at all. History remembers the men of the Nazi regime, but the stories of the women who survived them reveal the complicated, uncomfortable truth about how societies rebuild after unimaginable darkness. If you'd like more deep-dive documentaries like this, make sure to subscribe and comment which topic you want next.